All right, so let's talk about something else that's connected. How the federal government is tracking your child. The stimulus bill that we talked about a minute ago had a chunk of money in there for states. It was called a state fiscal stabilization fund, and the states could access that money if they agreed to do certain things. One of the things that they had to agree to do was to create or advance, and most of them had already created it, but to build out their longitudinal student databases, because the federal government wants the states to have all sorts of data on students. And if you got that money, you're building the database, and North Dakota got money. And then they also had that as part of Race to the Top, and so you end up with a massive student database. Now, the National Education Data Model suggests a lot of 400 data points on each student. That's not mandatory, but it's suggested. It's not mandatory yet, we'll put it that way. And so the data will go into the state databases, which are identically built under the stimulus bill. They were required to build all of these databases identically. And the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is called FERPA, has been around for a long time, and it used to protect the privacy of student data and forbid the release of personally identifiable information without parental consent. But it doesn't do that anymore because 2 years ago, the Obama administration gutted FERPA by regulation, not by statute. They did it by regulation, so it didn't have to go through Congress. And so now, without getting into all the weeds of it, what it means is that the U.S. Department of Education, for whatever data it gets, and your state DPI and your local schools can share personally identifiable student information with literally anyone in the world as long as they use the correct language to justify it. And parents will not have to consent to it because they won't even know that it's happening. All they have to say is, you are an authorized representative. You are going to do some sort of study, or you're going to do some sort of audit or whatever. I give you this data. There you go. But they say don't worry about it because whoever they give the data to will have to sign an agreement promising to take care of it. So don't you feel better about that? All right. Well, what data is given to the federal government? And I will tell you that your DPI will, and I don't know this because they've never said this to me, but if they are like every other state Department of Education in the country, this is what they'll say. We don't do this. We don't give data to the federal government. Absolutely not. That data is safe, is in Fort Knox. Nobody is getting that, no way, no how. Well, this is and when they say that, so then you say, okay, good. Well, then you would support legislation that would put that into law, right? That you can't give it. And then they'll always say, well, no, we don't need that because we're not going to give it to anybody. Don't worry. If they really and seriously don't have any intention of ever sharing the data, then they will support legislation that prohibits them from sharing the data. That's my view, but what do I know? All right, back to Smarter Balanced. Smarter Balanced, remember, got all this money from the federal government to create these tests. North Dakota is now a member of Smarter Balanced. Smarter Balanced has an agreement, a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Education. And in that agreement, Smarter Balanced has agreed to make student-level data that results from the assessment system available on an ongoing basis to the United States Department of Education for research, including for prospective linking, validity, and program improvement studies subject to applicable privacy laws. And as we see now, there are no such applicable privacy laws. And then in the appendix, they say the grantee, meaning Smarter Balanced, must provide timely and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level. So this is what they've agreed to do, to let the U.S. Department of Education look at whatever they get. We don't know yet what that's going to be because the test has not gone into effect. It goes into effect next spring. And Smarter Balanced hasn't said what data, but I can assure you that the demands will get greater over time, even if they start out reasonably. And I was at a hearing in Nevada a few months ago, and one of the legislators asked the president of Smarter Balanced about this because they were concerned about this. It seems to be me that you're going to turn over all this stuff that you've got to the U.S. Department of Education. And the president of Smarter Balanced seemed a bit flustered, and he said, well, they haven't asked for any of that. They haven't asked for it? Okay. Maybe they haven't had any reason to ask for it yet. The test hasn't gone into effect. You haven't collected the data. But you've got an agreement that whatever they ask for, you'll let them have. So I consider that a problem. He apparently did not. All right, so what kinds of data are we talking about? Well, under the National Data education data model, when these are the recommended fields, it goes on and on. It's over 400. But test scores, disciplinary records, and none of this data is ever going away. I mean, the idea is that this is going to be a dossier that lasts forever. So if your child has a rough 8th grade year and gets suspended for 2 days, that's going to be in the record. All right, health history, and you'd be amazed how much health history students, schools keep now, especially with kids who have IEPs and that sort of thing. Source of family income, bus stop times. Some states collect Social Security numbers. Some states base their entire system on Social Security numbers. Others don't. I don't know what y'all do. Peer rating data, baptism certificate, life insurance policy, voting status. There are just tons of these things that should be there, because the idea is this is a progressive model, and they want to be able to know everything that there is to know about a child, for his own good, of course, because the more you know, the better you can educate him, right? Well, I don't care whether it would help them educate him better. I don't want the government, which is what the school is, knowing any of this about my child. All right, why is the federal government demanding that the states develop these data systems identically? Because if they're all identical, you can share the data. If they're not, you can't. This is a federal statute that prohibits the federal government from collecting and maintaining a nationwide student database. They can't do it on their own, so they get the states to build the databases identically. And then you'll offer them some more money. If you'll participate in this initiative that requires states sharing data, then we'll give you this money. Or if you'll agree to share your data with this labor department or that child services department or whatever, then we'll give you that money. And then it can all be done because it's all identical. Okay, where are we going with the data? Let's talk about this for just a second. There was a report that came out from the U.S. Department of Education back in February of 2013, I think, a draft report, and it was called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance. And I encourage you to get online and read this if you want to. It's over 100 pages. It's about 120-something pages. But this is what they talk about, that remember, this is not about academic content. They're not teaching kids academic content. I mean, really, seriously, the philosophy is if a child wants to know something, he can Google it. You know, let's not waste time teaching facts. Let's get to the nub of it. Let's teach them the things that they need. Let's teach them grit, tenacity, and perseverance. Let's teach them attitudes. Let's teach them behaviors. That's what they're doing. That's what outcome-based education is. So where do they want to go with that? Well, they point out in this report that the Common Core standards actually require this, because there is a math standard that says that children should struggle, they should show perseverance in struggling with problems. And my first thought was, why do they have to struggle with problems? If you teach them how to do it, then they shouldn't be struggling. But they call it productive struggle. You gotta, you know, you've stepped through the looking glass when you get into this world. And so they said, well, if it's in the standards, we certainly have to test it. We have to measure it, right? If you're going to be promoting this kind of stuff, you have to see if it's working, of course. So how do you do that? Well, some of the most promising new directions are educational data mining and affective computing. What does affective computing mean? This is what it means, according to the report. Discrete emotions particularly relevant to reactions to challenge, such as interest, frustration, anxiety, and boredom, may be measured through analysis of facial expressions, EEG brainwave patterns, skin conductance, heart rate variability, posture, and eye tracking. How would you do that? Well, helpfully, on page 44, they give us pictures excuse me, of the mechanisms that you would use to do that. There's a facial expression camera, a posture analysis seat, a pressure mouse, a wireless skin conductance sensor. So these are what you could use to measure these things on kids. So you can see how they're responding to the education. Now, am I telling you that when the Smarter Balance test goes into effect that your children are going to be hooked up to these things? No, that's not what I'm saying. That is not going to happen yet. What I am saying is that this tells you what the mindset is of the people who are behind this. This is where they want to go, because if you read this report, you will see about one paragraph that talks about how this could be a privacy invasion. The main problem that they identify with it is that it's not practical for the classroom yet, and that's what they say. I tend to take people at their word. I find that when you do that, you avoid a lot of surprises. Okay, this is all, all about workforce development. Any of you who have been in the education wars for a long time may recognize this name, Mark Tucker, head of something called the National Center on Education and the Economy. And this comes from an infamous letter he wrote to Hillary Clinton shortly after the Clintons were elected president in the 90s. He said the federal government, he was explaining to them what they ought to be doing with education. He said the federal government should remold the entire American system for human resource development, a seamless system of unending skill development that begins in the home with the very young and continues through school, post-secondary education, and the workplace. And otherwise, as Arnie Duncan says, we want to know what Johnny does every year of his life. We want to know what preschool he goes to, what kindergarten, what he takes in high school, whether he does well, whether he doesn't. What does he do after that? Does he go to college? What college? What courses does he take? How well does he do? Does he drop out? Does he join the military? Does he get in trouble with the law? What job does he get? What sort of salary does he make? Does he change jobs? Where does he move? The government wants to know this because this is the way, this is the progressive model, that you've got these people at the top who will plan everything because you are too stupid to do this on your own. You cannot let it be done according to individual human freedom. It has to be planned. And if you're going to plan it, you've got to have data.